As Mim hurried down the steps deeper and deeper into the caves that lay beneath the Lyceum, she heard singing. A rich male timbre, Tennyson always sang to the cauldron as it were a fuzzy baby. She tugged at the hastily woven braid that bounced against her spine. Her mane of lilac-colored hair betrayed the source of her magic, and Mim kept it carefully restrained within the walls of the Lyceum. No matter how much time she spent outdoors, her complexion remained pale as moonlight. Creature of the night, the village would mutter under their breath until Mim's parents had finally sent her away. Popping and hissing filled her ears as she halted on the threshold of the vast candlelit cavern that contained the source of all mortal magic. Flames licked the enormous iron cauldron from below, cerulean and sapphire. Tennyson stood proudly beside the cauldron, stirring the bubbly liquid gently but methodically, soothing its spitting with his voice. Mim bowed her head to the cauldron in respect. "May my roots be strong and my branches reach for the sky," she murmured, repeating the creed in which all practitioners of earth magic were bound. At least her eyes were the color of tall grass. "Good morning, Mim." Tennyson beckoned her forward with a smile, wrinkles increasing his brown skin, warm like acorns in autumn. His teal silk robe swept the floor of the cave. Mim returned her teacher's greeting. "Have you been watching over the cauldron all night?" she asked, coming to stand beside him. She noticed the slightest hints of fatigue beneath his eyes. "There has been much change in the Summerlands," replied Tennyson. "The cauldron senses more on the horizon." Mim nodded. Several years earlier, an ambitious young warrior named Uther Pendragon had conquered the Summerlands, the southern half of the island of Britannia. He crowned himself king and established his court at Camelot. He'd made peace with the kingdoms in the north, but it was a fragile peace. The cauldron hissed again, as if to confirm Tennyson's words. "Sing to it, Mim, and see what you hear," he encouraged her. With trepidation, she opened her mouth. Only the most adept of mages could receive insight directly from the cauldron in this way. Its magic stemmed from the other side, the domain of the immortals who possessed knowledge of the future and the past. Whether the cauldron had been gifted or stolen was a matter of scholarly debate among the mages, but it had been protected on the hidden isle since before human memory. Mim closed her eyes tight, her lips pressed together as she concentrated with every fiber of her being. An octave below her reedy alto, she detected a low vibration, a hum that made her skin tingle. Slowly, an image began to form at the back of her mind. Iridescent scales swirled behind her eyes, followed by fire. Her throat grew dry. Footsteps pounded in the distance, rattling Mim's nerves. The scales and the flames combined into a terrifying gale, spreading outward across the wildwood, setting the Summerlands alight. Sweat soaked Mim's back. Was the cauldron showing her a dragon? What did it mean? Her news zinged with warning. Boom! Mim was jolted out of the vision, her concentration shattered. When her eyes flew open, she grimaced, gaze straining on an unwelcome face. "Merlin!" she bit out. Another large timber log slipped from his arms and crashed to the ground. He shrugged, stance at once careless and arrogant, brushing the hair from his face. One streak of white stood out amid the midnight black strands that grazed his shoulders. Not that Mim spent any time thinking about Merlin's hair, or the freckles on his slightly crooked nose, or the mischievous look in his exceptionally blue eyes. Surreptitiously, Mim wiped a trickle of sweat from her brow. Tennyson glanced between Mim and Merlin. The side of his mouth quirked in amusement. "Thank you for joining us, Merlin," said the chief mage. "Did you lose track of the time? Again?" Collecting the logs into his arms, Merlin said, "Time is all about perception, isn't it?" He grinned cheekily. Mim rolled her eyes. Taliesin's amusement faded. No, he said. The fire beneath the cauldron must never be allowed to dim. Not for a moment. Gesturing toward the simmering liquid, he commanded, Add the timber with haste. Still grinning, not even showing his respects to the cauldron, Merlin strode forward with the confidence Mim suspected must come from being royalty. Since he'd arrived at the Lyceum 6 months before, Merlin had charmed all the other students but kept himself apart, coolly aloof. And why is it so vital that the fire never goes out? Taliesin said, voice echoing in the cave. Mim had known the answer since her first days at the Lyceum. Merlin had seen 18 summers, like Mim, which made her wonder why he'd only just arrived on the Hidden Isle. As he looked up at the chief mage from where he crouched before the cauldron, Merlin's grin turned wry, because if the cauldron cools, magic will disappear from the mortal realm. Just so. And one day, perhaps one day soon, magic will be needed to save our island. The pronouncement made Mim shiver, but Merlin looked unaffected. Taliesin undoubtedly had more foreknowledge than he would share with his students. Mim's gaze darted toward a glint of steel near the entrance to the cave. A sword plunged deep into viney emerald stone. Legend held the sword also came from the other side, and that only the true ruler of all Britannia, one possessing strong earth magic, would be able to pull it from the stone. Whether the mages had presented the sword to Uther Pendragon, and whether he had failed the test, was not information to which Mim was privy. Join us, Taliesin told Merlin, nodding in his direction. It is your turn to stir the cauldron. Mim's hands had shaken the first time her tutor had extended the gleaming staff in her direction. The rod was hewn from the branch of a silver apple tree that belonged to the other side. It was as ancient as the cauldron and would burn the flesh of those without magic. Merlin accepted the staff with casual grace, as if it were his due. Taliesin stepped back, allowing Merlin his place beside him, Mim. She took a short breath, stomach pinching as she detected the scent of the forest, the freshness of moss clinging to an oak. Well, he had been carrying timber. Mim shook her head, chiding herself. Glancing at her sideways, Merlin said, You're looking lovely this morning, Mim. He held her gaze for a beat and her cheeks flushed. He was teasing her. Of course he was. You too, Mim replied, tone implying the opposite. The cauldron began to boil more violently as Merlin stirred. I mean it, he insisted. Your dress suits you. Mim's nostrils flared. All final year students wore a uniform of seaweed green that absolutely did not flatter her pallid face or purple locks or the constellation of moles above her right eye, which she called her three sisters. The green suited Merlin's sun-kissed skin. The uniform reminded Mim she would never belong. Mortification coursing through her, she felt the sting of tears, refused to cry. You might be a prince, Merlin, but that doesn't give you the right to be cruel, she told him. When she became royal mage, he wouldn't dare be cruel to her. Nobody would. Merlin jerked backward, as if he'd taken a blow to the chest. I'm not a prince. His eyes flashed with pain. I'm not anything. That's why I'm here. Mim blinked in surprise. Everyone at the Lyceum knew Merlin's grandfather was the king of Dalriada, one of the 3 northern kingdoms that had made peace with Uther Pendragon. Merlin circled the silver staff in the bubbly liquid with frustrated, angry yanks. The cauldron roared. Careful, Mim cried. You need to be gentle with it. She darted a look at Taliesin for help, but he retreated farther from his students. Taliesin had been training Mim long enough that she understood he wanted to see how she would handle the situation. A mage must maintain her composure under pressure. Moderating her voice, Mim suggested to Merlin, try breathing in for the count of 3 with each circle. It stills the mind and heart. I know what I'm doing, Merlin protested. Do you? Mim raised an eyebrow. There are rules for a reason, not that they seem to bother you. Merlin narrowed his gaze at her. Fine then. Since you know everything, here, show me how it's done. With pleasure. Blowing out a hard breath, Merlin dragged the silver staff through the cauldron, and a drop of the frothing elixir landed on Mim's hand. A searing pain radiated from the spot, flowed by a rush of euphoria. Her heart raced, and she felt as if she were back among the clouds. Magic more powerful than she'd ever experienced surged through her. The beat of her heart grew deafening, the magic hungry, demanding. Shadows swirled behind Mim's eyes. This is what you've been missing. The power was delicious, intoxicating. Suddenly, someone was shaking her. Mim? Merlin's panicked voice pierced her consciousness. Mim, let go of me, she barked. Merlin dropped his hands from around her shoulders. His face was contorted with worry. I was just trying to help. You've done quite enough. Taliesin grew closer, concern stippling his forehead as well. How do you feel? He asked Mim. She rubbed her temples. A bit of a headache. He nodded. It could have been much worse, he warned. Undiluted magic is dangerous, fatal to most humans. Mim's bottom lip trembled. I know. You should have been more careful, Taliesin rebuked her. What? Shame and indignation warred inside her. It was Merlin's fault! Taliesin looked from Mim to Merlin and back again. Merlin is new to the Lyceum. As the more experienced student, you should take him under your wing. Mim felt her face turn scarlet at his words, hands curling into fists at her sides. And Merlin, the chief mage continued, let this be a lesson to you that when you do not respect your own power, others will likely get hurt, especially those closest to you. Merlin's head drooped. He stared at the floor of the cave. Yes, Taliesin, he said dejectedly. You may leave us now. Merlin glanced up at Mim as he moved to leave. I'm sorry. I would never want to hurt you. There was an unfamiliar hitch in his voice. Mim lifted her chin. I'm not sure I can say the same. Merlin toyed with his single white strand of hair, saying nothing, and vanished swiftly from sight. That was unkind, Mim, said Taliesin when he was gone. He deserved it. He swans around the Lyceum like he's better than everyone else and thinks the rules don't apply to him because his grandfather is a king. His entitlement set Mim's teeth on edge. Mim fought every day to be treated like an equal by her peers. Taliesin pursed his lips. If you let yourself get to know Merlin, I think you would find you have more in common than it appears. I find that hard to believe, Mim said with a pout. He came from royalty, whereas her mother was a humble herb witch, her father a fisherman. Believe what you will, said her tutor. He patted her shoulder. Why don't you go lie down? You've had a shock. If you're sure you don't need any help with the cauldron? More students will be arriving soon for their lesson. Mim gave a small nod. In that case, I think I will. And I do mean rest, Mim. Taliesin caught her eye. Not flying. He winked. As she scurried from the cave, however, Mim knew there was nowhere she would rather be than the wildwood. Nowhere better to forget Merlin and this disastrous morning.